When the tide went out.
A story of loss, rock bottom, and the restoration that nobody saw coming. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Romans 8:28. There is a photograph, faded at the edges, the way photographs get when they have been handled often, taken out, looked at, put back. It shows a man and a woman on their wedding day, 26 years before the story we are about to tell. He is broad-shouldered and laughing, the laugh of a man who believes everything is ahead of him. She is looking at the camera with the expression of a woman who knows exactly what she has and is grateful for it. The photograph survived everything. It survived the job loss and the slow unraveling, and the eviction notice, and the night they loaded what was left of their life into 2 rolling suitcases and a truck bed and drove to a parking lot near Fresno because they had nowhere else to go. It survived because Lupe Faleolo kept it in the front pocket of her bag. The one thing she had decided when she was choosing what to take and what to leave was not negotiable. The man in the photograph is her husband, Sione. This is the story of what happened to them and what happened after. Before we move forward with the story, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to help us to grow this channel to uplift more people. Sione and Lupe Faleolo were Samoan, born in American Samoa and transplanted to California in their 20s, part of the migration of families seeking the economic stability that the island could not consistently provide. They had built something real. Sione was 53, a construction foreman who had spent 22 years working his way from laborer to crew lead to the man other men looked to when the job got complicated. He was built like the work had built him, broad, physical, with the quiet confidence of someone who had been solving structural problems with his hands since he was young. He sang in the car. He made a chicken dish on Sundays that their 2 adult children still talked about. He called his mother in Samoa every Saturday morning without fail. Lupe was 51, a school cafeteria worker who had been at the same elementary school in Fresno for 11 years. She was the woman the children ran to when something was wrong, not because it was her job, but because something in her face communicated that she had time for whatever you needed to tell her. She made friends effortlessly. She brought food to people who were going through things. She was, in the specific way of women who spend their lives giving energy outward, not always attentive to her own reserves. They had a 2-bedroom apartment in northwest Fresno. They had a used truck that ran reliably. They had 2 adult children, a son in the Navy and a daughter in nursing school in Sacramento, whom they were quietly, fiercely proud of. They had a church community at Grace Hills Seventh-day Adventist Church where they had worshiped for 14 years. They had a life. Not an extravagant one, but real and theirs, and built with consistent effort over decades. Then, the construction company Sione worked for lost a major contract renewal. The layoff came on a Thursday in November. Sione was not the only one. 40% of the crew was let go that day, a fact that provided no practical comfort. He came home at noon with his tools in the truck bed and sat at the kitchen table and told Lupe what had happened with the specificity of a man delivering a report, which was how he managed things that were too large to feel directly. He applied for work the following Monday. He applied consistently for 3 months. The construction market in Fresno in that particular season was contracted in the specific way of a regional economy responding to larger forces. Projects delayed, bids frozen, companies holding rather than hiring. He had callbacks. He had second conversations. He had 3 situations that looked close and dissolved. Each one took something from him that was slow to return. By the fourth month, the intervals between applying and the times he sat in the truck in the driveway without coming inside began to grow. Lupe watched the intervals grow and did not know how to name what she was seeing because Sione had always been the most forward-moving person she knew. She had never seen him still before. The drinking started quietly, not dramatically, not the visible, immediate collapse of a man who has decided to stop managing. It was beer in the evenings that became more evenings, that became earlier evenings, that became the answer he reached for when the gap between who he had been and who he currently was became too loud to sit with sober. He was not a man who had ever had a problem with drinking. He was a man who had found something that turned down the volume on a specific kind of pain, and who used it with the same methodical consistency he had brought to everything else in his life. Lupe's income, $14.80 an hour, 20 hours a week, the reliable but insufficient anchor of a part-time school cafeteria position, was not built to carry 2 adults, a truck payment, and the rent on an apartment in a California city where the cost of living had been climbing for years. She stretched it. She was skilled at stretching things. She had been stretching things her whole life. She moved money from one end of the month to the other. She stopped buying things that were not necessary. She did not tell Sione the specific numbers because she could see that the specific numbers would not help him. By the 6th month, she could not stretch it far enough. The depression arrived without announcement. This was the hardest part for Lupe to explain afterward. Not the sadness, which was understandable, but the specific flatness that descended over everything. The way the most ordinary tasks acquired weight they had not previously had. The way she would sit down to send a message or make a call and find 15 minutes later that she had not moved. She had been carrying Sione. She had been carrying the finances. She had been carrying the cheerful face for 11 years of elementary school children. She had been carrying the worry about her daughter's tuition and her son's deployment and her mother-in-law's health questions from Samoa. She was carrying all of it, and she ran out of the thing she had been using to carry it. She could not get out of bed on a Tuesday in April, then Wednesday, then Thursday. She called in sick to the school. She called in sick for 2 weeks. They let her go with the quiet regret of an institution that cannot hold a position for someone who has stopped being able to fill it. 3 weeks later, the eviction notice arrived. They were given 30 days. They spent the first 2 weeks in a kind of suspended negotiation with reality, calling family members who had their own limitations, investigating shelters that were full or did not accommodate couples, calling agencies whose wait lists were longer than their 30 days. Their son sent money from his Navy stipend. It was not enough. It was also everything he had, and Lupe cried about that privately for reasons that had nothing to do with ingratitude. Their daughter drove from Sacramento on a weekend and sat with them and researched and made calls and held her mother's hand and was 23 years old, trying very hard not to show how frightened she was. On the 30th day, Sione loaded the truck. They kept the photograph. They kept documents. They kept what fit and left what didn't. And driving away from the apartment complex on the morning of the 30th day was the specific experience of watching the life you built in a rearview mirror. They drove to a parking lot near a Walmart on the south side of Fresno because it was familiar and because Walmart parking lots are 24-hour and relatively safe, and because they had no destination that was more specific than that. They sat in the truck. Lupe held the photograph. Sione looked at the steering wheel for a long time. He said, "I'm sorry." She said, "Don't." He said, "Lupe." She said, "I'm not going to let you be sorry alone. Whatever this is, it's ours." He didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "I don't know what to do." She said, and this was the moment she would later describe as the turning point, the moment she would tell to every group and every church and every person who needed to hear it. She said, "I think we have to stop pretending we can figure this out ourselves. I think we have to ask." He looked at her. "Ask who?" She said, "God first, and then whoever he puts in front of us." They had not prayed together in months. Not because they had walked away from faith, they had not, but because they had been in the specific survival mode that sometimes crowds out the practices that sustain survival, the way extreme thirst can paradoxically make you forget to drink. Sione reached across the center console of the truck and took Lupe's hand. They prayed the way people pray when performance is not possible, when there is no audience and no energy and nothing left but the actual conversation. Sione prayed first, haltingly, the words coming out rough and honest. "We don't have anything. We don't know what comes next. We have been trying to manage this ourselves, and we have run out of the ability to manage it. We need you. We need something we cannot provide for ourselves." Lupe prayed after him. She thanked God for the photograph. She thanked him for Sione and for their children and for 26 years that had been real and good. She thanked him for the truck and for Walmart parking lots and for the fact that they were alive and together. Then she asked. She asked specifically for shelter, for sobriety, for the lifting of the weight that had settled on both of them, for a door, for a window, for anything. "We are calling according to your purpose," she said. Romans 8:28. "That is the only thing I have to hold on to tonight, that you are working, even in this." The parking lot was quiet. The truck was warm. They sat together in it until they fell asleep. In the morning, Lupe drove, Sione was in no condition, to Grace Hill's Seventh-day Adventist Church. It was a Wednesday, not a service day. She did not know if anyone would be there. She pulled into the parking lot and sat for a moment, and then went to the door and knocked. The administrative assistant, a woman named Sister Fona, who happened to be Samoan herself, opened the door, looked at Lupe's face, and said nothing except, "Come in." Pastor Thomas Reed was in his office. He was 61, a tall man of few unnecessary words who had been pastoring Grace Hills for 16 years and who had, by virtue of 16 years of other people's difficult realities arriving at his door, developed the capacity to receive hard news without flinching. He came out to the lobby when Sister Fona knocked on his door. He looked at Luke. He said, "Tell me." She told him all of it, the layoff, the drinking, the depression, the cafeteria job, the 30 days, the parking lot. He listened without interrupting for 12 minutes. Then he said two things. "You should have called me sooner." Not as a reprimand, as a statement of fact delivered with the warmth of a man who meant it. Let's start today. Grace Hill's Seventh-day Adventist Church was not a wealthy congregation. It was a fateful one. Pastor Reed made 4 phone calls that Wednesday morning. The first was to a deacon named Brother Manu, who owned a rental property and had a unit that was between tenants. The second was to the church's Community Assistance Fund, which was modest but real. The third was to a social services navigator he had a working relationship with, a woman who knew the systems and knew how to move through them. The fourth was to Sister Fona, asking her to coordinate a meal train. By Thursday evening, Sione and Lupe were sleeping in a bed. Not a shelter bed, a real bed, in a real unit, with a kitchen and a door that locked. Brother Manu had offered it at no cost for 60 days and said they would figure out the rest when the 60 days were done. Lupe stood in the kitchen of that unit on Thursday evening and held on to the counter for a long moment. She was not crying, she was receiving. There is a difference. The unit was the beginning. The harder work was internal, and it did not happen quickly. Sione acknowledged the drinking to Pastor Reed on Saturday, the first Sabbath they returned to church, sitting in a pew they had sat in for 14 years and feeling, simultaneously, profoundly known and profoundly ashamed. Pastor Reed did not treat the shame as the primary issue. He treated it as information and moved to resources. He connected Sione with a men's recovery group that met on Thursday evenings at a community center 2 miles from the unit, a group facilitated by a counselor named Mr. Iono, who was also Pacific Islander and who understood, in the specific cultural register that mattered, the weight of what Sione was carrying. The first Thursday, Sione sat in the parking lot of the community center for 20 minutes before going in. He went in. He came home quieter than usual. He came back the following Thursday. By the 6th week, he was one of the men who got there early. Lupe began seeing a counselor through a sliding scale community health clinic, a woman named Dr. Paloma Reyes who worked specifically with depression and who gave Lupe, in their second session, the gift of a clinical name for what she had been experiencing. Not weakness, not failure, a condition with a name and a treatment and a path through it. "You were carrying too much for too long," Dr. Reyes said. "That is not a character flaw. That is physics." Lupe held that. In the 5th week, Sione got a call. It was from a construction company in Fresno, not the company that had let him go, a different one, a commercial contractor that had recently won a significant infrastructure contract and was building a crew quickly. The foreman who called said he had gotten Sione's name from 3 different people independently. He said the word in the industry was that Sione Faleolo was the kind of foreman you built a crew around. Sione said he needed to be honest with the man, that there had been a difficult season and he wanted to disclose it. The foreman said, "I already know you've had a rough stretch. The people who recommended you told me that too. They also said you were one of the finest crew leads they'd ever worked with, and that hard seasons happen to good people." A pause. "Are you available Monday?" Sione sat with the phone in his hand after the call ended. He went to find Lupe. He was crying. He was not embarrassed about it. The job was real and steady. The pay was better than his previous position by 12%. The infrastructure contract was significant, and the company paid accordingly. Lupe, whose depression was responding to treatment and whose energy was returning in the incremental, non-linear way that recovery returns things, applied for a position at a different school in the district, full-time, benefits, a head cafeteria coordinator role that had been posted for 3 months without a strong candidate. She interviewed on a Tuesday. She was hired by Friday. Brother Manu, after the 60 days, offered them a long-term lease at a rate that was below market because, he said with complete simplicity, they were family. Their daughter came down from Sacramento to help them set up the unit properly. She brought plants. She hung things on the walls. She sat with her mother at the kitchen table, and they drank tea and talked for 4 hours. Their son came home on leave 3 months later. He walked into the unit and looked around, at the plants and the things on the walls and the kitchen with food in it and his parents standing together in it, and he did the thing that large young Navy men sometimes do when they receive something they were afraid they wouldn't get to receive. He cried. Nobody made it easier for him. They just let him. A year and 3 months after the parking lot, Grace Hills was doing something new. A community outreach program for unhoused individuals and families in the Fresno area, organized through a partnership with 2 other congregations and a social services agency. Pastor Reed had been building it for 8 months. He asked Sione and Lupe to co-lead the hospitality component. They said yes before he finished the sentence. On the first Saturday of the program, a couple arrived at the church, middle-aged, tired, with the specific expression of people who have been carrying something very heavy for a long time and are not certain they are allowed to put it down yet. Lupe saw them from across the fellowship hall. She went to them immediately, not with a program or a pamphlet or a speech. She went with 2 plates of food and the specific warmth of a woman who recognized something she had recently survived. She sat across from them. She said, "Tell me." The woman looked at her husband. He looked at Lupe. He said, "We don't know where to start." "Start anywhere. We have time." After the meal, she walked them to Pastor Reed's office. "How long have you been doing this outreach work?" Lupe thought about a parking lot near a Walmart on the south side of Fresno. She thought about a photograph in a front pocket. She thought about a prayer over a truck's center console in the dark. "Not very long, but I know the road." Sione and Lupe Faleolo lost everything. Not through negligence or moral failure, through the specific, compounding sequence of events that can overtake a careful life when enough things go wrong in close enough succession. Job loss is not a character flaw. Depression is not weakness. The inability of a part-time cafeteria income to cover the cost of living in California is not a personal failing. It is arithmetic. Romans 8:28 does not say God works for the good of those who deserve good. It does not say God works for the good of those who maintained their faith consistently throughout their difficulty. It says those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. A couple praying in a parking lot at the bottom of everything they had lost, asking specifically for help, calling according to His purpose. That qualifies. Here is the lesson in plain language. Ask sooner. Not after every other option has been exhausted. Not when the situation is past saving. Ask while there are still 30 days. Ask while there is still a Thursday. Lupe said it to Sione in that parking lot, and it is the truest thing in this story. We have to stop pretending we can figure this out ourselves. The church that moves in 4 phone calls, the deacon with a unit between tenants, the counselor who treats depression as physics. These are not coincidences. They are the answer to a specific prayer, arriving through specific people in specific timing. The help was always available. They had to ask for it. And one more thing. The restoration did not look like a return to what was lost. It looked like something better, a job that paid more, a position with benefits, a community woven closer by the experience of having needed each other. 2 people who survived something together and came out the other side knowing more specifically than they had known before that they were not alone. The tide went out, as tides do, and it came back in, as it always does. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Romans 8:28. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to be notified about more inspirational stories on redemption and hope.